this lesson proceeding. So, welcome back. And we are back to Parsha, and we are um, we're actually in the second Parsha of the book of Bamidbar, the book of Numbers. And so I actually want to start with an overview of Bamidbar because there's a lot going on in this biblical book. So I'm going to do an overview, but of course, week by week, some of these stories will play out. Um, we're going to have to talk about my summer schedule at some point, but I'm not ready to talk about it yet. But there's also, I also want to do a summary of this week's Parsha, which is Naso. There are a couple of highlights that some interesting things about this parsha that I want to pull out of the parsha and focus on, and then show you a connection, an interesting connection between them, and then some life lessons that are derived both from this week's parsha and also from the book of Bamidbar more globally. Okay, so it's a packed agenda, and so let's go ahead and begin. So Bamidbar, the book of Numbers, I'm going to call it Bamidbar because that's what I call it, is the fourth of the five books of Tanakh, which means we are uh, 3/5 of the way through our Parsha study. And so I'm going to do an introduction or sort of a bullet point highlights of all the things that happen, because when we get to the next book, the last of the five books of Moses, the majority of it is a review of what happened. It is what we refer to as Moses's goodbye speech. And so there's a tremendous amount of review, but there's a lot that happens in this book, in this Sefer, in this book of Bamidbar. And so I want you to have sort of a scaffolding to hang on um, all of what we're going to talk about in this book. Okay, so starting from last week, so as a sign of God's connection to this nation, God tells Moshe to count the 12 tribes of Israel, and he's supposed to use one person one representative from each tribe, and they are counting not every single person. They are counting the number of men who are eligible for war, basically from, like, I think it's from ages 20 to 60, and extrapolating from that how large the population is. So the total number that the book comes up with is, and this excludes the tribe of Levi because the Levium, the Levites, have a completely different role, is 603, 550. 600,000 is often the number that's used to describe how many um, letters there are in the first five books of Moses. So there's somewhat parallel, not exactly, but somewhat. But anyway, God then explains to Moshe that the Levium are supposed to camp around the tabernacle, and surrounding the Levium and the tabernacle are the rest of the tribes. And the Israelite camp is organized into four groups of three tribes each, on the north, on the south, on the east, and on the west of the tabernacle. And that is the formation that they will follow through all of their journeys for the next 40 years. Okay, so then the Levites are counted, and they're assigned their particular duties that have to do with the tabernacle, with the Mishkan. And the number of Levium is slightly less than all of the firstborn of the other tribes. And there's a replacement going on. It used to be, or the original plan was, that the firstborn would serve in the Mishkan, in the tabernacle. They would be the officiants of that. But because of the sin of the golden calf, the firstborn redeemed themselves from their obligation to serve with pieces of silver. And what's interesting is that this still happens today. There's a ceremony called Pidyon Haben, literally means the redemption of the son, in this case, the firstborn son, who should have served in the temple or in the time period we're in the Mishkan, in the tabernacle, but is we redeem the child from that service with 5 silver coins. I mention this because I've only ever been to one, and it was for my grandson, because there's a bunch of conditions that have to apply today in order for this ceremony to take place. Number one, the firstborn child of any woman has to be a male, has to be a normal vaginal birth, not a C-section. Has and the woman or the mother or the father cannot be from the tribe of Levi. That cannot be a Cohen or a Levi today. Okay, so all of those conditions applied to our firstborn grandson, and so we had this ritual. But I digress. Okay, we are also introduced to the laws of Sota, which I don't know how your translation translates Sota, but it's a wife that is accused of um, adultery, basically. Some translations say the wayward wife. I don't know. You may be familiar with this. We're going to go into it in a lot more detail. And the Nazir. The Nazir is, I don't have any idea how you say this in English. Um, this is somebody who withdraws from the pull of the physical world. We'll talk about this also. Um, and what the connection is between these two things. We also have in this week's Parsha the priestly blessing, which Aaron and his descendants are meant to confer upon the entire nation. This also happens, by the way, today. In Israel, the priestly blessing is given every single day in synagogue. In the diaspora, only on the holidays of Sukkot, Pesach, Shavuot, and Yom Kippur. So when you move from a diaspora community, if you're a shul goer, it is unusual to see that the priestly blessing is actually bestowed every single day in Israel. Okay, now also still in this parsha, the tabernacle, the Mishkan is completed, and the priest, that is the princes. I'm sorry, the each tribe has a prince called a Nasi, brings a special inaugural sacrifice. Somebody's not muted. Margaret, I think it's you. Can you mute yourself because I'm hearing a little background? Um, okay, so we also learn more details about how the Mishkan is set up and dismantled and how Israel would travel through the desert following the ark. Okay, and that's one part of the book of Bamidbar, of the book of Numbers, and it's followed by a series of other events. A lot of them are kind of fall on the negative side. So I'm just going to run through these in terms of bullet points, and when we get to them in the correct parsha, I'll explain in more detail. So the first that I want to mention is that the people complain about the mun. This is this holy food, and they are unsatisfied with this holy food, and they want meat. And God responds by sending them quail, a whole lot of quail, but then punishes them for their ingratitude for the original food, that the holy food of the month. There's also the episode of Miriam and Aaron, who are the siblings, of course, of Moshe. They criticize Moshe for having separated from his wife, and Miriam is punished with sarat, which we talked about a couple of weeks ago, is usually translated as leprosy, but it is not the leprosy that we know. It's a skin ailment. And it is it is a physical manifestation of a spiritual um, of a deficit, I'll call it. That's not the exact translation, but whatever. Okay. Then we have the episode of the spies, because what was supposed to happen is that the Israelites were supposed to arrive in Israel very shortly after the giving of the Torah. And spies were sent out, 12 spies were sent out to scout out the land. And 10 of the 12 spies returned with this disparaging report of uh, we can't conquer it. It's inhabited by giants. And they freak out basically the entire camp. And God, who promises, who has promised this land to this people, responds by the punishment is that for the next 40 years, they are going to wander in the desert, during which time all of the, almost all, with very few exceptions, of the adult men who were counted in the census, the ones that are between the ages of 20 and 60, they will pass away in the desert. And that has to happen before the crossing into the land of Israel. A whole lot more to say about that, but that's the highlights. There's also the story of a man who desecrates the Shabbat and is punished by stoning. Then we have the rebellion of Korach. Korach and Datan and Aviram lead a mutiny against the leadership of Moshe and Aaron. They are the ringleaders, and it does not end well for them. Um, and God punishes these ringleaders and also reinforces that Aaron is his selection for leadership, and so there's now the institution of tithes and other gifts that are for as long as the temple is standing, the Mishkan, and then the temple is standing, to be given to Aaron and his descendants, the Kohanim. Then we have the story of the red heifer, whose ashes are mixed with water and sprinkled on a person who becomes impure. And we'll talk much more about that when it's time for that. Also, in the book of Bamidbar, Miriam dies, and the well of Miriam, the water source that followed the Israelites around as they're moving around from encampment to encampment in the desert, it disappears. There's no water to drink. And there's the very famous episode in the book of Bamidbar and the book of Numbers of Moses striking the rock he was supposed to speak to and being punished by not being able to enter into the Holy Land. Aaron also dies. Then there is a battle with Amalek and some other enemies, and more complaints by the Israelites. And now there's the point that this is I'm like reviewing 40 years in like 4 minutes, but Israel's now poised to enter the land. And now the king of Moab, the current king of Moab, whose name is Balak, is interesting because we just read the book of Ruth on Shavuot, and the Ruth and Orpah, I think I'm pretty sure I taught you this last year or something. Nazarite, thank you. That's the English for Nazir, Nazarite. Thank you, Rita. Um, the father of Ruth and Orpah was also the king of Moab, a different king of Moab. His name was Eglon. Anyway, this is the story of Bil'am, who is hired by Balak, the king of Moab, to curse the Jews, well, to curse the Israelites, and the whole thing with his donkey, and every time he opens his mouth, instead of curses, blessings flow out and so forth. Then we have the episode of the Israelite man who sins, the Israelite men sinning with Moabite women, and God punishes them with a plague. And one of the princes of Israel, one of the leaders of the tribes, a man named by the name of Pinchas, public I'm sorry, that one of the lead I'm wrong. One of the leaders of the tribes is I forget his name, but the woman's name is Cosby. And I'll have a lot more to say about her because she's one of the 10 chapters in the book Women from the Nations in the Hebrew Bible. Pinchas, the grandson of Aaron, slays them in the midst of their illicit act, and God rewards him and the plague stops. And then I'm doing this really fast, by the way, not that you should remember, just that you should um, know all of the kind of exciting stories that are coming up. After this terrible blow, God once again counts the men, and the total is 601,730, which is slightly less than the count from 39 years before. Now Israel's preparing to divide the land because they're getting ready. The 39 years have ended. The people who were the men who were um, punished with the punishment they would die in the desert, they pretty much all died off. Israel's preparing to divide the land and to enter the land, and this group of five daughters wants, they make a plea to Moses because they want land because their father died without male heirs. And there's a whole fascinating story about the daughters of Zelophehad, which I'll save for when we get there. We're taught the laws of holiday sacrifices and of vows. Um, God tells Moshe to wage war against Midian, one of the other many enemies. We learn about koshering, making food vessels that were created in outside of the nation, how to use them for kosher food. Until today, if I go to the store and I buy a pot, let's say that's made in Germany, I'm making something, whatever. Before I can use it in my kosher kitchen, I have to immerse it in a mikveh. There's a special blessing that Jews say when they have something made of glass or metal. It's not true for plastic or wood, glass or metal, that they're going to use in a kosher kitchen. Now, interestingly enough, because I live in the land of Israel, if the vessel was made in Israel, oh, ceramic also has to be immersed in the mikveh. If the vessel was made in Israel, you don't have to do that. So sometimes if you go to like a houseware store, today in Israel, there's two interesting things. One is that some of the packaging will say that this particular vessel, whatever it is, does not need to be immersed in a mikveh because um, it was made in Israel. And the other is that a lot of these stores have a little mikveh attached to them. So you can go and buy like a set of dishes or a set of pots and pans, and then you can immerse it in the mikveh right on the grounds of the store, which I personally think is a very cool thing. And I never saw that in America. Okay. And then the book of Bamidbar concludes by recounting the 42 trips that the Israelites took during their 40-year journey through the desert. It also defines the borders of the future land of Israel. And then in the final verses, um, well, I'm going to skip that part. Um, so Rashi, the biblical commentator Rashi, points out that in the book of Bamidbar, in the book of Numbers, the people, at least the men of warrior status, are counted on multiple occasions. And the idea that what is the connection between the repeated counting and God's relationship with this nation? He says that when you have something that you value, when you cherish something, you count it, which makes me think, of course, of money. Um, I, you know, I, for example, maybe you do the same thing. Like I often go and check our bank balance. I'm not literally counting out bills, although when I was a teenager, I worked for a department store in America called J.C. Penney. I don't even know if it exists anymore. I haven't lived in Israel in 15 years. It might have gone bankrupt. Does it exist still? Yeah. Okay. So I was hired to work in the catalog department, but somebody in the management took a liking to me and he moved me around a bunch of different offices and I worked in the cash office. And I'm 16 years old. I'm a high school student and every department, has like a cash register and they would bring their cash register drawer and it was my job to count it. And so I actually got very good at counting bills. But it occurs to me now that that's a lot of responsibility to give to a 16-year-old, but I was a responsible kid. What can I say? Anyway, the idea is that the book of Numbers both begins and ends with a census of Israel, is an expression of um, the way God cherishes this nation. And even though there's a whole bunch of bad stuff that happens and a whole bunch of ways that the people displease God, He is still emphasizing to us that we are still His treasured nation. Okay, that's the book as a whole. Now I want to summarize the parsha of this week, which is the parsha of Naso, which you will find in the book of Numbers, chapter 4, verse 21, and it goes until chapter 7, verse 89. And just to connect these two, the name of the parsha Naso refers to the concept of counting because there's a head count again of the children of Israel that are taken at this stage. Now they are counting the men from the tribe of Levi, the Levite men between the ages of 30 and 50, because those are the ages that they actually do the work associated with the tabernacle. So here's another connection to like modern day Israel. We have there are men who live in Israel today who have traced their lineage to Aaron HaKohen, to Aaron the high priest, and there is at the Third Temple Institute, there are people who invite known descendants of Aaron, who are Kohanim, who are priests. It doesn't mean a whole lot today because we don't have a temple, but they invite them in and they take their measurements and they prepare for them what are called Big Day Kahuna, the special clothing of the priests, like literally, and they custom make them with the intention that we will get the temple back soon. And if they are between the ages of 30 and 50, they will be working in the temple and they're going to need uniforms. I mean, they're holy uniforms, but whatever. Okay. Also in this parsha, this is a little bit of a repeat. God communicates to Moshe the laws of the Sota, the wayward wife, the one who is suspected of being unfaithful to her husband, and also the laws of the Nazarites, the Nazir. Um, and the Kohanim are, this is a little bit of a review because we just did the whole book, are instructed on how to bless the people. And then this, by the way, this is the longest parsha in the entire 5 books. And the reason is because there's a tremendous amount of repetition, because the leaders of each of the 12 tribes, the princes, the Nasim, they bring their offerings for the inauguration of the altar, and their gifts are identical. Every one of them is brought on a different day, and the Torah repeats they all brought exactly the same thing, like a silver bowl, and I don't know what the exact offerings are, but whatever they brought, the Torah repeats it. Instead of saying the first tribe brought this, this, and this, and then following that every day another tribe brought the same thing. It doesn't say that. It repeats the language, which is extremely unusual because um the Torah is usually in the written Torah, it's usually known for brevity, so much so that some major episodes happen in a verse or two. And here we have in this entire parsha, it's 176 verses, which by the way corresponds to 176 verses in Sefer Tehillim, in the book of Psalms, chapter 119, which is has 8 verses for each of the 22 letters of the Hebrew alphabet. So if I did this right, 22 times 8 should be 176. Somebody check me on that. I think that's right. Okay, now I want to go much deeper into this Sota ritual, which is in this parsha, but specifically in chapter 5, verses 11 through 31. So what's the story here? You have a husband who suspects that his wife has been unfaithful. He has warned her not to seclude herself with some man, a specific man. And then she did seclude herself with this man, and there were no witnesses to the actual adultery, but there's still a suspicion because her husband has some red flags. He said, don't ever be alone with Joe Schmo, whatever his name is, and she is alone. And there are people who see that she is alone, even if they don't know what happened behind closed doors. He came into the house when nobody was home. An hour later, he left. They were alone together for that period of time. The husband can call her to the Sota ritual. So what happens? They go to the Beit Hamikdash, the temple, and the husband, who is suspicious that his wife has been unfaithful, he brings a special offering of barley, which is like animal food. It's not like fine flour. It's a very basic offering of barley without oil and without spices. And the idea here is that this is a very serious accusation that a husband would um, make on his wife. So the korban, the sacrifice, the offering that he brings is plain in order to match the seriousness. The best connection I can make for you is that until today, well, in Israel, it's not true because in Israel, I don't know if you know this, but when a Jew gets buried in Israel, there's no coffin. They are um, they are buried without a box. But in America, the you can of course spend $40,000 on a piece of fine furniture coffin box, but the most traditional way is to bury in a plain pine box, which doesn't cost $40,000. Whatever it costs, it is a simple or plain pine box to match the seriousness of the fact that somebody has just passed away. So that's a sort of an analogy to the special offering of barley flour that the husband brings. Uh, a priest, somebody who's working in the temple that day, writes a curse on a piece of parchment that includes God's name, the holy name of God, and then the that piece of parchment is dipped in water that is mixed with the dust from the temple floor. And that is the potion, so to speak, the what is referred to as the bitter water that the woman who is accused of being unfaithful is required to drink. Before she drinks, there's an oath that she takes that says if she's innocent, if her husband suspected her and she did nothing wrong, then she will be blessed. And the traditional blessing is that she will, within the year, she will have a son. If she's guilty, then her body will react to her guilt, maybe not immediately after she drinks, but sometime shortly thereafter. And the way that I understand it is that her abdomen will basically explode. Um, okay, so if she drinks of this bitter waters that includes the erased ink from the name of God as well as some dust from the temple floor, if she's innocent and nothing happens, she is publicly cleared. Um, but if she's guilty, again, it's like some kind of divine test, and she experiences physical suffering. So the very same potion can either have no reaction or it can have like a deadly reaction if she is guilty. So there's not a thing in the natural world that would behave that way that it would, well, maybe there is. I don't know. There's something that would kill one person and have no effect on another. But there is something metaphysical, something spiritual going on here. If she refuses to drink, um, then she is forbidden to her husband from now on. Okay. Now, this sounds a little, I don't know if gruesome is quite the right word. It does sound a little sexist. You should know, by the way, that if she is guilty and her punishment is that her abdomen blows up, the man with whom she was secluded, with whom she was adulterous or unfaithful, he also is punished. The goal here, if in a society that is very different, has very different norms than the society that we live in, the goal is not revenge. It's not like the husband who suspects his wife is taking revenge to embarrass her, although there are some very embarrassing aspects of this ritual. The ritual is meant to resolve doubt and to restore trust and also to deter actual betrayal. Because if you knew that this was going to happen to you, that if you strayed in your marriage, if you knew that this public ritual was, you could be called to the temple to have this happen to you, that would probably serve as a deterrent for a lot of people. So it did happen, but it didn't happen like a lot. So that in its most positive understanding, it's about protecting the sanctity of marriage and protecting the community from either sin that is hidden or suspicion that becomes toxic when it enters a marriage if there's no way to clear the suspicion. Okay. Now, even the journey that this suspected unfaithful wife takes, which is described in the Mishnah, there's a Mishnah called Sota. It offers a step-by-step description of what happens from the time her husband says, like, I'm going to summon you to the Sota ritual until she gets to the temple. So the after her husband warns her not to be secluded with somebody and she is secluded with this person, the first step is that they bring her to the local court, the local Beit Din, the local Jewish court, and the court assigns two righteous men, two Torah scholars, to accompany the husband and the suspected wife to Jerusalem. And what's the reason for that? They want to make sure that the husband does not have relations with his wife on the way. It could they're they don't have cars in this time. They're going by foot. It could take multiple days depending on where in Israel they live. And they want to make sure that the husband does not invalidate the ritual by being with his wife along the way. When they arrive in Jerusalem, she is brought before the Sanhedrin, the high court, in order to try to get her to confess. She's actually encouraged to confess all along because if she confesses, she a couple of things. Um, she doesn't suffer the ill consequences of her abdomen blowing up and dying, and also if she confesses, she prevents the sanctity of God's name from being erased in the water. So they might say something to her like, maybe you were drunk, you're young, you had bad influences, you made a mistake. If you made a mistake, confess now, because they're trying to prevent the desecration of God's name. How is God's name desecrated? When it's written on a parchment in Hebrew, it's written on a parchment, and then the word is dissolved. The name of God is dissolved in this potion, in this water that she drinks. It's not, it's something we would never do. Today, if we have a document that has one of God's names in Hebrew, we don't just throw it away, we bury it. And so God's name printed or written on a Torah scroll or on a mezuzah scroll or in a scroll that has like the Book of Esther or something. God's name's not there, but if God's name appears in writing, we treat it with tremendous respect. We don't just throw it away. If she confesses, if she says, "Okay, I am guilty," they stop the ritual. She goes home and she gets divorced, and that's sort of the end of that. If she insists that she's innocent, then she is taken to a certain place in the temple grounds. It happens to be the Eastern Gate, near the gate of Nicanor. I'm not sure if that's significant. And the ritual is performed there. And this whole journey from her husband's first accusation until either she confesses or she drinks of these waters is structured in a way to blend some pressure, to preserve her dignity as much as possible, to impress upon her the spiritual gravity of this, both of her sin that she's accused of, and also of the spiritual gravity of erasing God's name in order to bring peace into the marriage. Okay, that's the Sota ritual in a little bit more depth. There's much, much more to say about this. I have to say, one year, so some of you are very familiar with the idea that on the night of Shavuot, we stay up all night and learn Torah. And in a shul that my husband worked at in America many, many years ago, I spoke at 4 in the morning. My slot was 4 in the morning, and I talked about the Sota ritual because it was going to be in the parsha after Shavuot. And I went into the Mishnah. I spoke about it in great detail. And I remember there at 4 in the morning, as you can imagine, I didn't have the same crowd that people who spoke like at 11 p.m. had. But there was this one man, a very, very nice, sweet old man. He has since passed away. And he was there and he was wearing sunglasses. And we're in like a classroom in the synagogue. And it's 4 in the morning. And I'm going on. And I happen to be a night owl. So I have a lot of energy at 4 in the morning. But he was wearing sunglasses. And I asked him later, why were you wearing sunglasses? And he said, if I fell asleep, because it was 4 in the morning, he was an old man. He said, I didn't want to insult you, that you should look at me and see that I had fallen asleep. So he was wearing sunglasses. Anyway, that's my Sota story. Okay, now I want to transition to this Nazarite, this Nazir concept, because a Nazir, a Nazarite, takes on a special level of holiness. This is another theme that appears in this parsha. And he takes a vow, that there are three key prohibitions of his vow. One is that he will have no wine or grape juice or grapes or raisins or grape seeds or skins, no grape product during the term of his vow. Even vinegar that's made from grapes is off limit because wine, which is a product of grapes, is seen as lowering inhibitions, leading to potential indulgences or sins or, bad blurred judgment or whatever. Also, he takes a vow. And by the way, either in its time, it doesn't exist anymore because we don't have a temple, but either a man or a woman could take these vows. Also, the second prohibition was no haircuts. This may sound familiar to you because there is a very famous biblical personality that was a Nazarite from birth. Usually, this was when it was relevant. It was a vow that somebody took in adulthood, but I'm speaking, of course, of Shimshon, of Samson. Um, so we know that we might not have known that he didn't drink wine, but you certainly knew that he didn't cut his hair. They can't cut their hair for the duration of the vow. And the idea is that the growth of the hair represents, it parallels the spiritual growth and also a separation from vanity. So we are separating from sin, we're separating from vanity. I have to tell you the story. There's actually somebody whose story is told in 10 from the Nations. When I met him, he was a young man, a single guy. He had long hair, very long hair, very unusual for a man. And he told me that he made a vow similar to this, not exactly. He made a vow that he wasn't going to cut his hair till he got married. Now he is married and he's a father of three or maybe four children, and he has like regular hair, but he made a vow not to cut his hair until there. The third prohibition, the third vow that a Nazarite makes is to have no connection, no contact with the dead, not even close relatives, no funerals, no Shiva, no mourning practices. They have to avoid all ritual impurity that comes from being close to a dead body. Um, and so they take on these three vows. Now, what is the connection? Why does the Torah teach us about Sota and then teach us about the Nazarite in close proximity to each other? Because there's a spiritual dynamic going on here. The Shema Shmuel, the commentator that I took this from, connects these two sections because they are both a response to something that's out of balance in the spiritual world. So the Sota, the wayward wife, the wife accused of adultery, represents somebody that has been pulled into temptation, where her evil inclination, her Yetzer Hara, isn't just operational, but has overpowered her and had her engage in behavior she ought not have engaged in. The Nazir, the Nazarite, is somebody who also connected to the Yetzer Hara, the evil impulse, preemptively distances himself or herself from all these physical indulgences, namely no wine and no grooming. That's sort of what one of the things the hair represents, in order to reclaim a level of spiritual clarity. So the Nazir, the Nazarite, by taking these vows, is basically saying, oh no, Yetzer Hara, you're not going to get to me. I'm going to take a vow of um, Nazariteness. I don't know how you say that in English. I'm going to take on these vows and I'm going to elevate myself spiritually so you can't touch me. So the just to go a little bit deeper, the Sota ritual is not just about exposing guilt. It is a kind of a realignment because God so values the the peace between a husband and a wife that even he is willing to let his name be erased in the bitter waters in the potion. But it also shows that there is for somebody who is willing to face the truth openly, that there is the potential for teshuva, for return, for repentance, if someone is honest about what they did wrong. There's a saying among the rabbis that if somebody lives in the time when the Sota ritual happened and they witnessed it, either they lived in a town in between where her hometown was and Jerusalem, and they saw the party of the two Torah scholars and the husband and the wife going to Jerusalem for this ritual, or they lived in Jerusalem and they saw the ritual take place on the temple grounds. It is supposed to be so shocking that a person who sees it should take on the vows of becoming a Nazir, becoming a Nazirite, in order to say, I don't want anything like that to ever come close to me. I want to elevate myself so that I am never tempted to sin in such a way that I would ever be involved in something like this. Okay. So it's a kind of spiritual therapy that when a person falls, how to recognize it and how to rise above it. It's true that if a wife has been unfaithful and she confesses, she is divorced, but she doesn't die. Okay, if she has confessed. And the idea of true tshuva, true return, it's not just about regret, it's also about um, anchoring yourself again in holiness. So um, it's a very overarching concept in Torah life that if you sin, you can be restored. Okay, so there are there are avenues to reconnect to God. That there's never anything that you can do that if you do true repentance, that you cannot re-anchor yourself in holiness. You cannot reconnect to God. Now, I have 15 minutes left. I want to talk about some life lessons first from the Sota ritual and then from the Parsha as a whole. So here's one life lesson from the ritual. The truth comes out. The the bitter waters, what are called the Sota waters, were a way to bring out in a supernatural way a, a reality that was hidden. No human being saw it, but God saw it. The deeper message here is that the truth matters. Truth is also a very critically important part of living a Torah life. And in any relationship, trust is a foundation. And if you have unresolved suspicions, it can rot a relationship from within. And so we learn from this not to live with secrets, not to live with accusations that are left to fester, but to clarify what is the actual situation, even if it means that the couple ends up divorced. So that leads to the second life lesson, which is the concept of shalom bayit, which is peace in the home, a sacred value in Torah, to the point, as I said, that God's name is erased in the ritual. That is something that is usually forbidden. I told you that when we have God's name printed, we bury it. We To erase it in water. That is like so disrespectful, but it's something that God allows in order to restore the peace between a husband and a wife, because it shows how precious um, you can even compromise the integrity of God's written name in order to preserve the relationship between a husband and a wife. Um, Another life lesson from the Sota ritual: we are responsible for what we allow to fester. So the whole process starts because a husband suspects his wife, but he also has some responsibility. He warned her, don't seclude yourself with a certain man. That means that before he got to that point, he saw something that made him suspicious, but he let it escalate. And so the life lesson is when you see trouble in a relationship starting in a an intimate relationship, a workplace dynamic, a friendship, a relationship with one of your children, something going on, that the advice is to address it early before it gets to the point where you have to, as it were, drag your wife to Jerusalem to stand in front of the Sanhedrin and drink the Sota waters. The last lesson from here is that the Sota ritual was a public ritual. Anybody who was on the grounds of the temple, could, if it was going on that day, could observe the ritual. And so public rituals impact not just the people that they're happening to, but they have social impact. The very fact that the social ritual was so public was meant, it was intended to be a deterrent. Remember, I said that anybody who witnessed it, that the rabbis advised that person, if you, for whatever reason, this God put you in this place to see this play out, that it's meant to be a deterrent, and you are supposed to think very seriously about taking upon yourself the prohibitions of being a Nazarite for a fixed period of time. So to put yourself very far from um, the sort of mindset that would cause you to sin, so that such a public ritual would ever have to play out in your home, in your marriage, whatever. So it reminds us that actions, even actions that happen in private, can ripple out and have impact socially. So the idea is that our integrity matters, even if nobody's watching. So the whole sota ritual is um, the catalyst for it is that somebody saw the woman seclude herself with a man that she was told explicitly not to seclude herself with. So whatever happened in private became public. Okay. And I think this is the last thing I prepared, the some life lessons from the Parsha as a whole. So I told you that the Parsha opens with um, the well, maybe I didn't tell you this, so let me make it clear. Each of the families of the tribe of Levi had a specific role when it came to the tabernacle, when it came to the Mishkan. And the beginning of the parsha details what are the responsibilities. This family is responsible for this family is responsible for that, and so forth. And the idea, the life lesson here is that everybody has a role. We all have a unique contribution to make. And whether your role is public or behind the scenes, to build a community, it requires all the players playing their roles. Um, a second life lesson from this parsha is about the power of discipline and setting limits. So it's a respect for boundaries. Remember that the Nazarite laws, not cutting your hair, not drinking wine, not coming into the physical presence of a dead body, it teaches us about um, setting limits in our spiritual lives in order for us to grow spiritually. So it is not so different from, I'm going to speak as a Jew now, but there are things that you may take on yourself, or you may have already taken upon yourself. Like, okay, so I have all these laws about how Shabbat looks for me as a Jewish woman, but you, in your Shabbat observance, if whatever that looks like, you may say for the hours, the 25 hours of the Shabbat period, or for part of that day or whatever, I am not going to use my phone, or I am not going to spend money, or I am not going to drive my car, whatever it is for you. And I'm not saying that you're required to do these things, but you may take on certain boundaries in order to grow spiritually, in order to honor the boundaries of Shabbat. It's a good example. It's not the only example, but you may in your life be a person who has committed to eating biblically clean. So you have established and respect certain boundaries that you have created for yourself that are in order for you to advance spiritually. So, okay, I've hammered that one to death. Let's go on. I have three more, and then we'll finish. Okay. Um, there is a section in this parsha about confession and restitution in the case of wrongdoing, and that is a reminder to us to take responsibility, to do what we have to do to make things right, to not let guilt fester, so to own our own actions. Another Torah value that has a life lesson, universal application, that to take responsibility and to recalibrate. Um, I told you that in this parsha, the Kohanim, the priests, are taught the blessing. The I don't, what do you call it? The priestly blessing in English. I think that's what it's called. I remember one time many years ago, I went to a funeral of a colleague, And it was not a Jewish funeral, it was in a church somewhere. And whoever the officiant was, the pastor, whatever, in English, he starts reciting the priestly blessing, which I knew from from going to synagogue. I knew in my Torah life. I actually didn't know at that time the Kathy, can you unmute yourself and tell me how you pronounce that? Ar, ar, I don't know how to say that word.
Ironic,
Aaronic,
ironic.
the Aaronic blessing. Okay. Um, so in Hebrew, we call it the Birkat Kohanim, or in English, the priestly blessing or the Aaronic blessing, shows that all of us have the opportunity to be a channel of blessing for others. And it doesn't mean you have to like lift up your hands and say Yivarechecha, whatever the priestly blessing words, but that you can say something kind or uplifting, and that can carry deep spiritual significance for another person. So it's really a problem. I really have a problem. I spend way too much time on social media. But one of the things that I see, there's a couple of guys that do this. They raise money, they give money to people in very dire circumstances. Okay. So they'll run into a homeless guy and give him $500 to get him off the street so he can like get to a shelter or something like that. And one that I watched today is this guy who does this. He has like 1 million followers, more than 1 million followers. And so when he meets somebody that has a need, he gives them like a little starter amount of money to get them off the street. And then in this particular case, the guy who was homeless was a trained carpenter, but through a whole series of unfortunate events, he was homeless, and he took that money and he bought some basic carpentry tools, and then he got a job working as a carpenter. The guy But he needed more sophisticated carpentry equipment. So the guy did a fundraiser on his page and raised like, I don't know, like $5,000 or something, and gave it to him he went and found the guy again and gave it to him in cash. That is blessing others. I'm not saying only with here we're speaking about with words, but we are meant to be channels of blessing for other people. And that means sometimes giving a lending ear to somebody who is in emotional pain, bringing somebody a meal if they just had a baby or if they just had a loss, or just saying something that uplifts a person if they are in a dark place, helping somebody helping somebody who doesn't have a car get to a place they need to get to, or to go drive them someplace to pick up their car, whatever. That's the lesson. We are meant to be blessings and to bestow blessings upon one another. And the last one, and with this I'll finish, um, goes back to the story of each tribal leader. The prince of each tribe, the Nasi of each tribe, brought the exact same offering to the Mishkan. And the Torah, as I told you, records each one, making this a very, very long parsha. And what is a lesson we can derive from that? One of the lessons is that giving, generosity is personal. So, in the age that we live in of crowdfunding, where somebody has a need, a very specific need, and they're trying to raise X amount of dollars, often people give if they have, well, this is my story. I give if I have a personal connection. I know the person that is impacted, their, let's say their house burned down and they didn't have the right kind of insurance, and they need $100,000 to rebuild their house, or to replenish whatever was lost in the fire, whatever. If I have a connection to the person raising money, or to the person um, who it happened to, or the person that it happened to is connected to somebody that I know, my giving is personal, even if I'm giving the same $20 that 1,000 other people gave, my giving is personal. So that is what you give, even if it looks like the same thing that somebody else gave, whether it's money or time or a blessing or a kindness, it is unique because it comes from you. So the giving is personal and something that only you can do, even if you're giving the same dollar or $10 or $20 or whatever to a cause. Okay, there you go. Now we are caught up. We have an overview of the book of Bamidbar. We have a more in-depth understanding of the Parsha of Naso. And we have 4 minutes if anybody wants to make a comment um, or ask a question. Elizabeth, go right ahead.
Uh, would anyone make a Nazarite vow today with no temple?
No, no, but and I would say once we get a temple back, it might be restored, but it wouldn't be because the like that's over because once we get the temple, it means we're in the Messianic era, which means there is no more Yetzer Hara, which means there's no reason to take that vow because people will stop sinning. So there's no reason to protect yourself against sin because there's no evil inclination anymore. The evil inclination will be vanquished. That's how we understand one of the hallmarks of the Messianic era. So yeah, that's over. Those days are over. Good question.
Okay, you have you given a teaching in the past about your feeling on the next temple? Because I thought man was going to build it, but you maybe you've taught on that before, and I haven't been
I
here.
there's a couple of different opinions about the third temple. One is that people will build it. The other is that it already exists. I'll just do this very quickly. I don't know that I've ever taught this, but the other is that it exists in its entirety in the heavens, and it will, when the time is right, plop down and descend on the Temple Mount. And the way that I understand it, or the compromise between these two positions, is like this: when, and it refers to the Mishkan and the first and the second temple as well, that were built by human hands. But once it is built and inaugurated, it is the presence of God enters it, and now only the functionaries, the Kohanim, the priests, can enter those grounds. So while it's being built, so here's an example. We renovated our house. We renovated our bathroom. Okay. While it's being built, I got workers, they're carrying tile and they're hanging faucets and whatever they're doing in our bathroom. But once the bathroom is completed and it's like our private bathroom, no strangers, no workers are coming in there, right? It's now our private space. So the way I understand, the way it makes the most sense to me is that it will be built by human hands, but it won't be elevated to the holiness of the temple until God's um, imminent presence descends into it. So
Okay,
there you go.
all right.
Anybody else in the minute or so we have left? Questions or comments or anything?
When you go to the Temple Institute in Jerusalem, they say they've got everything ready for the temple to be rebuilt.
Right. So
Um,
they are of the opinion that they've made all the vessels. They've made, remember I was talking about the
yes,
clothing of the Kohanim that they are sewing. They're prepared to move the shofarot, the I don't know how you say it, like the horns that
right, the trumpets.
trumpets, thank you.
Yeah.
They're all prepared and ready to be moved in as soon as
Mhm.
the building is ready. But that's only one opinion. They operate their entire institute on the strength of that opinion. It's a legitimate opinion, but there is another opinion that there is a heavenly temple that will, because the third temple differs from the first and second temple in that it will be eternal, in that it will never be vanquished. And even more so, and I might have mentioned this to you, and here is that this cool idea that I learned that when we are in the Messianic era and the temple is functioning, that the Jewish people will um everybody goes up a level in their service of God. So the Jewish people will like outgrow the need for a physical temple and we will bequeath it to the nations. So
Wow.
the temple building, the building itself
Yeah.
that initially will belong to the Jews
Mhm.
will be something that we will give over to the nations for their use in their worship of God. That's a very cool thought for me.
I know.
That someday I should live long enough to see that. Um, but yes, so that is the alternate opinion, and it may even be the majority opinion. I'm not a total scholar on that issue.
So is that what Yehuda Glip does at the Temple Mount? Is that he says it's going to be a house of prayer for the nations?
Well, he's referring to, I mean, all of the temples were the offerings from certain times of the, I don't know if it was all year round, but certain times of the year,
Mm.
the 70 core nations were invited to Jerusalem, or no, that's not, let me, I'm speaking off the top of my head. I didn't research this, so let me just be accurate. There were offerings that were made on behalf of the 70 nations in the temple in Jerusalem on Sukkot when the
Mhm.
temple was standing. Um, and I would have to ask you to Glick exactly how he understands that,
Okay.
but it is clearly in Isaiah, it's clearly there that
Mm.
it, as a matter of fact, my the the synagogue that my husband served in when when we first met 30 years ago was is called in English Beth Tefillah, which means a house of prayer, and it comes from that verse from Isaiah that it will be a house of prayer for all nations. So it's I don't exactly know what the dynamic is
Mm.
going to be then, but it's a very interesting question to contemplate.
Fascinating. Thank
Yeah,
you, Rivka.
pleasure. Okay, all right. So with that, we will end. Thank you very much, and I will, God willing, see many of you. Rita, maybe next week you will join us again and also turn on your camera so I can see you. Okay. Thank you guys. Have a good
God
rest of
bless.
the week.
Thank
Bye.
you.